As we begin our Get to Know the Broncos rookie series, we're going to start things off with Nik Bonitto, edge rusher out of Oklahoma. The Broncos' second-round draft pick at pick number 64. We get to know the person, we get to know the player, and we talk about the projected fit on this team here in 2022. You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, and both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Broncos Country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day. Every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format or here on YouTube. Make sure you do us a favor, smash that like button, and make sure you hit that follow or that subscribe button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sarah, it's great to be able to talk Broncos football with you here once again. I'm very excited about starting up this series here for the next several episodes, maybe the next 2 weeks here for this Denver Broncos football team, getting to know the Broncos rookies. And I like the fact that we're approaching it from the angle, getting to know the person, getting to know the player, and then maybe talking about how do they project to fit within the team, within the scheme, and all that stuff, man. Excited to break it all down.
I'm excited too, Cody. And speaking of starting a series, I don't know if you've already finished the series Ozark yet. I mean, with the NFL draft, I haven't been able to yet. It's too much watching Nik Bonitto to watch Ozark yet, but I know you're a big fan, so I'm excited.
Terrible ending. I love the show. Horrible ending.
Okay, all right. I'm bracing myself
for anybody,
then.
but
I'm
it's just like
bracing
a lot of
myself.
unanswered questions. That's what I'll leave it at that. But you know what? There aren't many unanswered questions here about Nik Bonitto, the Broncos' newest addition at the edge rusher position for them. Obviously, the round 2 pick for them. Let's get to know the person, Nik Bonitto. Now, one thing that I've been going through and scouring, going back to old reports, getting old profile series notes on him. One of the things that stood out to me is that he has high character as both a person and a football player, both on and off the field. He's somebody that can be relied upon by coaches and by the people in his life. And I think that speaks volumes. He's got a really strong foundation, I think, with his family, with his mother and his dad, who've been very supportive of him. He's got good people around him, which I think is super important, especially as you make it to the NFL level. This is one aspect I think will help him as a pro. And he seems willing to learn too. And it's going to help when he has a former teammate that's going to be joining him. I think the process of going from high school to college is very intimidating for a lot of young guys. But then now going from the college game to the NFL certainly is going to be challenging, and it's going to present a lot for Bonitto as a person. But I am so excited about it. He's got leadership traits that Broncos GM George Paton had talked about, and the scouting department. These are things that they value highly. What more can we dive into about Nik Bonitto, the human being, before we get into the player?
Well, Cody, you talked about it, the fact that he's well liked, by teammates and coaches, and obviously that's a maturation process that takes some time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You go from high school to college, and all of a sudden, I mean, you might be the big man on campus at high school, but when you're a football player at a big name school like Oklahoma, I imagine the celebrity level increases dramatically. And so for Nik Bonitto, I think there was a maturation process there, and that was talked about. I was reading Dane Brugler's kind of background report on him as we're prepping for this show, and it talked about the fact that he went through a maturation process early in his career at Oklahoma. It said in Dane Brugler's report that Bonitto was in the doghouse his freshman year at Oklahoma and really grew as a person over time there. So you love to see that. You love to see guys go through their learning experiences and become better from them. Those
Yeah.
are the kinds of people that you can rely on in your locker room. And just watching and listening to Nik Bonitto talk, doing some interviews with Broncos media and those type of things. Yeah, he's a quiet leader. He's a quiet player and got a kind of a serious demeanor about him, as George Paton talked about. But I think definitely it's cool to hear that he had a maturation process throughout his time at Oklahoma that certainly makes him worthy of a top pick. That's all part of the equation, right? You can't just be talented. You got to be a good guy for the locker room as well.
Yeah. When he's also a dual sport athlete as well. He played his high school ball at St. Thomas Aquinas, which we all know is a national powerhouse. You get a lot of big name players that go play there and then obviously go on to perform at the college level and then end up in the National Football League here. But one thing that George Payton said, he's got a great personality and, as you mentioned, a little quieter. He says, I like the real serious demeanor, very intelligent, all about ball. So he's a business guy. He loves football, which at the end of the day, that's one thing that people want to know. Like executives want to know, does this player love football? Bonitto definitely does that. He says, I knew some people who coached him. Jason Taylor coached him in high school. And he says, Jason, the former player. We all know who Jason Taylor is, coach. Hey, GP, come on, man. And he says, we talked to all the coaches at Oklahoma and then Jason, a lot of people, and they spoke very highly of him. Here, he impressed us all. We enjoyed him, and he's going to fit in with our culture and our team. And I think that he's coming to a really good situation, Sarah, because guess who he's coming to a defensive locker room with? Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson, Josie Jewell, just some guys to name a few, Ronald Darby. For him, he's probably going to be a guy that's going to be willing to listen, ask a lot of questions, which you like to see. But for him, the demeanor that he has, I think will bode well into translating into Nik Bonitto, the actual football player. And Sarah, we're going to get into the football player aspect coming up here in just a few moments here on Lockdown Broncos. But before we do that, let me tell Broncos Country about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode of the show. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and information this season. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. BetOnline.net is the place to be. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up and learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, we'll focus on Nik Bonitto, the football player, and what he's bringing to the table for this Denver Broncos football team here in 2022. But before we do that, real quick, mile high salute, major shout out here to everybody in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day. Whether you're waking up, you're going to the gym, you're making breakfast, you're having your morning cup of coffee, we appreciate you turning on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting provider to listen to Sayre Bedinger and I break down all things Denver Broncos all year long. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country. It means the world to us. Sayre, we got to know Nik Bonitto, the human being, the person, a little bit earlier on in today's episode of the show. Now let's talk about the football player here. I feel like there were a lot of great things that we took away from some of his interview series that he did, obviously with Sidney Jones of Denver Broncos TV. And one thing, as we mentioned earlier, obviously being a St. Thomas Aquinas guy, but he sat down with Sidney Jones of Denver Broncos TV, and he said, for him, she asked him, what are the Denver Broncos getting in you? And he said, you're getting a guy that's going to come in and compete and work day one. It doesn't matter where I'm at, whether I'm the water boy, whether I'm doing this, I'm going to give it 100%. And I think that's a really great mentality to have coming into things too. I think it sets a really good perception. There are some things like Broncos fans. I know that there was a little bit of an issue over the weekend. For some reason, like he blocked a bunch of Broncos fans. I will say this. I don't necessarily think Nik Bonitto did that himself. There are certain programs, and I've actually ran into this issue myself because other third-party tools manage it. This is exactly what happened with Wade Phillips. Wade Phillips has a bunch of Broncos fans blocked, and they've never interacted with him before. There are certain programs that are used that sometimes auto-block certain things, or like they perceive it as spam mentions. So I don't think it's anything personal. Broncos Country, don't look too much into that. I definitely did want to address that though, Sarah.
There's no way that Nik Bonitto's going in there and just blocking a bunch of fans as his first act as a member of the Denver Broncos. That would be super weird, and that would be a big red flag
It's a
for me.
third-party tool that's going on there behind his
Yeah,
Twitter account.
yeah, exactly. And those type of things can help you block out some unnecessary, unwanted noise. But I guess in this regard, not necessarily the best thing. But as a player, Cody, you love watching Nik Bonitto play the game. I mean, this was a guy that was on my radar very early on last year, right after the 2021 NFL draft. Actually, I remember he was one of the first guys that I watched. And it was because of the fact, and we saw it kind of play out over the season. He was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year per Pro Football Focus, and the reason for that is, to me, he's such a dynamic player off the edge. We look at what the Dallas Cowboys were able to do last year with Micah Parsons, and I know Micah Parsons had a lot more time at Penn State, kind of in an off-ball type of role. But as you move Nik Bonitto into the NFL ranks and against NFL competition, I think you have an opportunity to really utilize him in a lot of the same ways. I know we've talked about that with Baron Browning as well, but I think the Broncos defense is going to be it's going to be pretty unique, Cody. We know that Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator, he wants to utilize these guys in a variety of ways to get pressure on the quarterback. I don't think we're just going to necessarily see Nik Bonitto as a traditional edge all the time. I think he's going to be moving around the defensive formation and being used as a weapon, because that's exactly what he is. And you turn on the Nebraska tape and watch this guy, you get to see kind of a microcosm of everything that he brings to the table as a player. Sorry to any Nebraska fans that, you don't want to go back and relive that game, but that was really the number one game to me in terms of, hey, this is kind of the full gambit of everything that Nik Bonitto can bring to the table. That's the perfect example there. I think everybody should go back and watch that game.
Yeah, well, a guy that stands out on tape, just a freakish athlete. And also, for him and their comeback effort against Baylor last season as well, he secured a game-sealing interception from a 25-point deficit that they had faced, which is, a testament to them fighting and competing and never giving up there. One thing that George Paton said about him, too, in terms of what they liked about him, he says, we thought Nik Bonitto was one of the better pass rushers coming out, the bend, the speed, the burst, very natural. And we talk about that first step with obviously his 10-yard split time being very elite when we talk about Sayre. This is also very exciting in terms of how he models his game after some guys, like you mentioned, Von Miller, Shaquille Barrett, various other pass rushers, and so the TJ Watts, like people that he really wants to try to emulate parts of his game and add it to his repertoire, which, hey, those aren't bad selections that you could choose there. So I like that. Peyton said at Oklahoma, he had a lot of production. He needs to get a little bit stronger. We didn't anticipate him being there at number 64. So we're really fortunate. He'll add to our group and we'll have a very good wave with Nick. And I think it's going to be really good competition. So we mentioned the Randy Gregory's, the Bradley Chubbs, the Malik Reeds, Jonathan Coopers, Andre Mintz, Aaron Patricks. Well, you're adding in another guy there, and competition is a very good thing here. And I think that for a guy like Bonitto, he's not going to shy away from any kind of competition, which I'm excited about. And obviously we're seeing the social media memes about Casa Bonitto. Obviously very clever marketing right there on behalf of the Broncos and social media crews and everything like that. But let's talk about the defense a little bit. You alluded to a little bit about him making some different plays and playing a little bit different alignment, not just edge rusher. What did he do in Alex Grinch's defense at OU that you feel like the Broncos can maybe capitalize on this upcoming season?
Well, I think there may be a misconception or misperception out there about the fact that he was misused in Alex Grinch's defense, and of course, you want to see a guy be unleashed at all times. And the Oklahoma defense, they had a number of guys they tried to get on the field, but when Nik Bonitto was on the field, Cody, it was really cool to see just the different ways that he was able to be utilized as a pass rusher. Of course, in a lot of the obvious pass rush situations, they just let him pin his ears back and utilize that 1.53 10-yard split and beat offensive tackles, because offensive tackles often couldn't get their hands on him when he was just a free rusher. And because of that, you have such a domino effect, right? I mean, when he explodes off the ball like that, and he's very good at timing the snap. That's another thing to watch for as you go back and maybe search up some Oklahoma games from this past season.
YouTube's a great resource.
YouTube is a great resource, absolutely. And Nik Bonitto, he can time up the snap, he can pin his ears back and beat a tackle off the ball. And when he's able to do that so consistently, Cody, what does that allow a pass rusher to do? It allows you a secondary inside move, and you see that from him oftentimes. When he's a free rusher, he's either going to try to bend around that edge or he's going to cut to the inside. Like, he's almost like a basketball player doing a crossover move. I think he needs to get better a little bit at utilizing his hands. But to me, one of the things that you see is just him being able to avoid a lot of contact. I mean, offensive linemen, they can't really get their hands on him. So he does a really great job, almost like a receiver at the line of scrimmage trying to beat press coverage. He does a really good job of beating offensive linemen, whether it's to the inside or the outside, and not just as a free rusher, but he could help Oklahoma disguise a lot of their blitz packages by just being there on one side of the field. And they could send a blitz from the other side of the field and have him kind of fake like he's going to rush and then drop as a quarterback spy, which he was extremely effective at. A lot of his best production to me, Cody, came as a result of him being the quarterback spy. And he shut down a lot of those scramble drills. He shut down a lot of, secondary efforts from quarterbacks to try to make plays. He's very, very good in those two ways, just pinning his ears back and then working as a quarterback spy. I think those are two primary ways we're going to see the Broncos use him as a rookie.
Well, one of the things we're going to get to coming up here in just a moment, we're going to project how he fits into the Broncos' plans in 2022. What does his potential look like? You get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, rockauto.com. And if you need anything for your vehicle, rockauto.com, they have everything that you could be looking for, whether it's brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, or even brand new carpet for your vehicle. Rockauto.com is the place to be. And plus, their prices are always reliably low, whether you're a professional or a do-it-yourselfer. Why spend up to 30%, 50%, or 100% more for parts at a local chain auto parts store or car dealership when you can get them cheaper at rockauto.com? And the one thing I like about rockauto.com, their site makes it very easy for you to find what you're looking for. You can choose the year, make, and model of your car, and you can see all the parts available based on brands, specifications, and even the prices that you prefer, all at rockauto.com. So go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or your truck, and write Locked On Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box, so that they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, Broncos Country, it would mean the world to Sayre, Bedinger, and myself if you would smash that like button here on the YouTube channel, on this video, and comment for the algorithm. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, whether it's here on YouTube or whether it's on your favorite audio podcasting platform. Thank you so much. Sayre, talking a lot about the potential now that Nik Bonitto has as a football player, and maybe how he can make an immediate impact here in 2022 as a rookie in a very loaded right now edge rusher room. And there's a lot of excitement there and a lot of possibilities. But I wanted to get some other things too, because these are some questions that were brought up by local media after the draft. And one of the questions George Paton was asked is whether or not, if the move for Nik Bonitto was a safety blanket situation in case guys like Randy Gregory, Bradley Chubb got injured. And George Paton said, that's not why we took him. We took him because he was the best player on the board. They're all different, Randy, and they're all unique. They're all different. And he just adds a little bit more explosion. He said, I said, maybe at our last presser, you want to have a wave of pass rushers. He's done a lot. He's lined up on the edge. He's played stacked. They blitz him. He's spied. He's pretty dynamic in what he does, and he'll just make the group stronger. And that's what you need in our division, and that's what you need in this league. So George Paton, as we all know, Sayre, very forward thinking, especially like with his last two drafts. He's been very forward thinking. He doesn't appear to reach for things. He appears to evaluate everything with a consensus basis within that locker room. I think that's a great path here for Paton to take, but kind of does address that. And look, hey, if anything happens to any of those other edge rushers, you do have a security blanket, but this was not why the move was made. I like that as well. But in terms of that, like, how might Nik Bonitto be able to have a role in the defense to help stop the run? Because that was an area that the Broncos struggled, and it has been noted by George Paton that he needs to get stronger, and obviously he'll be working with the Broncos strength and conditioning coach to be able to get stronger before the season begins.
Well, he is going to need to get stronger, Cody. That was the one area of his game that I think, not necessarily that he would get washed out, because, I mean, yeah, he's really good at knifing through the line of scrimmage and making those tackles for loss. Obviously, his tackle for loss numbers kind of speak for themselves in that regard, but absolutely, he's got to get stronger at the point of attack. And there were flashes of that, right? You see the flashes when he's able to get his hands up into the chest and get leverage against an offensive lineman. He is able to set that edge. Very, again, reminiscent of Von Miller. I don't want to talk up the Von Miller comparisons too much, because Von Miller is probably the greatest defensive player in Broncos history, in my opinion. But you see the similar traits that these guys have, and the similar ways that they're able to utilize. He's less than 240 pounds, so obviously he's going to need to be kind of a bully. He's going to need to have strong hands, and I think he does need to improve in that way, because it's not like you're going to throw him out there and say, hey, on the running downs, we want Nik Bonitto off the edge, setting the edge. That's not where he's at right now in his game. I think Baron Browning is probably a lot closer in that regard. We saw him at the Senior Bowl doing a lot of setting the edge, which he didn't do a ton of at Ohio State, but he does have that big man strength to be able to do that. I think Bonitto has a ways to go to catch up, but he's definitely got the potential to do that. So where does that fit his role as a rookie, right? I mean, does that mean that he's only going to be a pass rush specialist? Is he only going to be out on the field in certain like NASCAR formations? How is that going to affect? Because you don't want teams to just, okay, well, Nik Bonitto's getting a series. Let's run it down. Let's run it right at his edge the entire time. You don't want that to happen and really throw him into a funk in his rookie season either.
Well, I think the one thing too, and I can attest to this to edge rushers as well, in terms of setting the edge, for him not having much experience doing that at the collegiate level, right? Getting after the quarterback, sometimes dropping to be in that spy. He might be thrown into a situation like, even if he doesn't have the total strength that the Broncos want him to have, where he could just do it. And Sayre, it's easier said than done, but for edge rushers, it's really all about what's the stunt, right? Or are they having him attack the outside shoulder of the offensive tackle? Because if Bonitto's going to do that, he's going to punch with his inside hand on that outside shoulder of the tackle. And then if he's going to set the edge, all he's going to do is hunker down, squeeze it down hill line depth, which means that you're not getting pushed out and you're not stepping too far in. You're squeezing it down hill line and maybe condensing it to where that running back's going to have to make a decision to try to extend out wide. And that's where we've seen other guys have a lot of success, being able to stab and step out wide and then use their lateral speed and their explosiveness to be able to pursue towards the sideline. And I think that's where the Broncos the last couple of years have had success. But, there's also the potentials where the Broncos can unleash him on third down. And Sayre, in my head right now, seeing some of the film that I've seen from him at Oklahoma, part of me is wondering, are there going to be any situations where we might see a high motor group with Jonathan Cooper and Nik Bonitto? Could we see a lot of them in the preseason here for the Broncos, but even in the regular season? Will we see these guys in exclusive third and long situations? That's something that I am personally hoping we do see.
I am too. It gets me really excited for preseason yet again.
I love preseason. Let's go.
Know. I love it, man. I absolutely love it. I know a lot of people like to complain about the preseason and talk about the quality, but I love watching the preseason for that specific reason, getting to watch these young guys ball out. So I think we're going to absolutely see that. Jonathan Cooper has to factor into the discussion. He's making this team, barring, I think, injury, Cody. I think that Jonathan Cooper is going to be a factor, and he's going to be better than he was last year, in my opinion. So I think we're getting ready to see just a really deep group off the edge. And Nik Bonitto, like you said, he's part of that. It's not a contingency plan in case anybody gets injured, because Bradley Chubb has already talked about, he's the healthiest he's been as an NFL player. Randy Gregory, obviously coming off the shoulder, you question that a little bit, but at the same time, like, contingency or depth, it doesn't matter. You have to have multiple guys that can rush the passer in today's NFL. You have to be able to have a rotation, just like we saw back in the Super Bowl 50 season when the Broncos had Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware, Shaquille Barrett, Shane Ray. You have all these guys coming off the edge. You can just send it in waves, and you have to be able to do that in the NFL today. It's a non-negotiable. Nathaniel Hackett talked about this, Cody. He said, there's two things in the NFL right now today. You have to have a quarterback, and you have to have somebody that can, affect the quarterback.
Yep.
So that's basically it right now. And if you can't do those two things, you're not competing. So the Broncos understand number 2 on that list. They have number 1 covered. Now number 2, in my opinion, with Bonitto joining Randy Gregory, Bradley Chubb, the host of others in this pass rush group, I feel like number 2 now is covered as well.
I am super excited to see the Broncos edge rushers get to work here in training camp. And with that, I'll announce some really cool, exciting career news here, Sayre. And obviously, you've known this for a while. I appreciate you, my friend, for all your support. But I will be moving to the Broncos beat. I'll still be doing Lockdown Broncos, but I have officially accepted a job with Mile High Sports full-time in person as their lead Broncos analyst. So I'll be at Dove Valley every day for practice. I'll be at all the home and away games. I'm very excited to be able to amplify that and to bring even more here to Lockdown Broncos alongside Sayre, Bedinger. So there's been a lot of people, are you still going to be doing Lockdown? Yes, I will. It's a big part of who I am and what's gotten me to where I am. And Sayre, I owe a lot to you, my man, because before I ever got into this industry, I wrote for you, Predominantly Orange, and Sayre obviously does a great job over there, Predominantly Orange. I will be doing written content at Mile High Sports, so make sure you keep Predominantly Orange and Mile High Sports in your rotation of things that you need to read every single day, as well as Lockdown Broncos in your audio and video listening and viewing experience here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast. But with that said, Broncos Country, hope you enjoyed getting to know Nik Bonitto, the Broncos' second-round edge rusher out of Oklahoma. Next up on tomorrow's episode of the show, we're going to get to know Greg Dulcich, the Broncos' new tight end. We get to know the human being, we get to know the football player, and we get to talk about the potential here in 2022. You get that on tomorrow's episode of the show.